My name is Kycell, and I have finally learned the tumultuous origins of the forgotten Minotaur King. Kind, the Minotaur, leaned back in his large armchair. His calf of a son Court played on the carpeted floor of the house between our group. Ahani, at my request, started to write down details pertaining to the decor of the lovely house Kind was hosting us in at the time. This was when it finally came to my attention that we hadn't been told what exactly brought us to this location.
Well, if you're asking, this is my house. I've been the de facto mayor of the village for years now.
If that was so, why, when we met the man, was he staying in a room at the public house?
I often stay there when I need to contemplate things, like this recent notice of the Regelisad return to rule the town.
I was now curious how that was possible. The Scullamandrae harbors, which lied to the north of this considerably small village, had been under the control of the Regelisad, according to my rank, since before Crunturg ruled. This was when Kyne headed off the conversation by saying his position and the lack of previous Regelisad interference would be explained further in the tale of Crunturg. But before we got those answers, he would need to tell us how the mighty Minotaur's reign was in the leading years. Under Crunturg's leadership, the lives of the Minotaurs improved greatly. After his swift and hard-earned conquering of the castle, he and the newly freed Minotaurs set out for the village of Goldinirod. They sought out the human population and made them aware of their new citizens. Fam Leeman headed the efforts of moving the Minotaurs. The caged spouses and offspring of the warriors were freed and set about the task of creating new homes from the surrounding lands of the village. This was when Kind first met Crunturg for himself. Kind told me of the inspirational things Crunturg told him, how his father was strong and brave, and Kind was brave for surviving the destitute conditions King Byrk had confined the boy and his mother to. He set the Man Reaper to form a new military structure to incorporate the new fighters, as well as the task of weeding out any guardsmen or newly demoted knights that posed potential threats to Crunturg's rule. The Minotaur fighters were fitted with weapons and armor in the honor of Cord by the now lead blacksmith of the kingdom, Yor, and given the title of paladins, putting them further the human warriors of Goldinirod's armed forces. A number of Crunturg's new decrees did indeed benefit his Minotaur brethren, arguably to the deficit of the human citizens. The former slave Minotaurs were given the best housing and were privy to the best farmlands, even had those lands belonged to humans, loyal to the king or not. However, any speak of ill will toward the new king would result in quick and severe suppression, not at the order of Crunturg, but by the Man Reaper. At the mention of the dark black and red Minotaur named the Man Reaper, Kind clenched his fist in anger and slammed it on the chair. This startled Myrink, who had begun playing with the barely able to walk baby Court. With an expression of sorrow and apology, Kind rose and lifted Court onto his shoulder. He walked with the child balancing on his long curved horns and turned to the group.
Sorry for that outburst, but I had a lot of bad blood with the Man Reaper, and it's getting a bit late. I'd offer you a bed, but I believe you already paid for rooms at the public house, right?
We stood, and I offered him an apologetic bow. Ahani gathered the copious books she had filled today, and Myrink gave baby Court a small wave as we exited the mayoral house, but not before making plans to continue this conversation the following morning. As we walked through the quiet town, it came to my attention we hadn't seen nor heard any other Minotaur folks since our arrival, not even Kind's wife, just humans, the occasional elf, and those granite-skinned dwarfs. We made our way to the public house. The owner looked our group over closely, and upon seeing Kind wasn't present, let out an exhausted sigh of relief, and went about reading a flyer regarding the semi-demolition, semi-remodeling of the Mindus Castle. I asked if I could borrow the flyer as Myrink and Ahani continued to our room, but he gestured behind his desk and showed a rather large stack of the papers, then informed me that the piles were all over town, and so I grabbed one and continued to our room. As I entered the modest lodgings, I could see Tristafé and Ahani had taken the two proper beds and left me with a small roll of padding likely meant to pass as a cot. Mildly annoyed, but far too exhausted to truly care, I sat on the floor cover of a bed and looked over the leaflet. On one side showed a beaming picture of an intimidating yet incredibly young tigress in a familiar red sari dress, who I could recognize as Princess Olabunga Rajalasad, and the massive brownish-green wall of a Samazatory frogman behind her was undoubtedly Prince Dinge. But what further surprised me was next to them, and barely reaching Dinge's knees, were two much smaller frog people, a pair of twins, a young boy and a young girl. Knowing my own kingdom's royal family, this was the crowned prince and princess in line behind Dinge, Prince Ranst and Princess Jasp, twins, as is customary of Samazatori breeding. Their presence at the castle could possibly pose a problem, regardless of Kind's still not entirely clear plan, but this also brought the thought of Dinge's twin, the second-in-line princess that had been exchanged with the Rajalasad for Princess Walla's hand. The prince never allowed discussion of her, but her mysterious fate crossed my mind. perhaps a novel for another day. Back to the leaflet, another image spoke of the methods of the demolition. The Snow Ogre company, Bombogenesis, was hired to make quick work of the castle. This must have been the band we encountered that had killed poor Dar. Now the BBG initials on the helm of the ogre made more sense. It went on to list servant and construction job opportunities to citizens of Goldinirod, offering land and title to those that left sterling impressions on the royal family. That was when I had a magnificent and potentially far less horrific plan than any involving that Vigabane horde kind was harboring. I went to Tristafe and Ahani, both of whom had settled in for the night, and told them of my idea. We could obtain access to the castle, and even first-hand information on Crunturg. All we would need to do is to get ourselves jobs as servants in waiting or amongst the coming construction crew. Myrink stared at me as if I was a blathering fool, and Ahani gaped at me as if I was a prattling moron. In unison, they rolled over back in their beds and went quickly to sleep. I would ask Kind the following morning to see what he thought. The following day, Kind met us back in our room at the public house. We enjoyed a farm-fresh breakfast of eggs and pork bacon Kind himself cooked. He went on to tell us this was how his mother had prepared breakfasts for him. The positive mood he was in gave me reassurance that he would be more receptive to my plans. However, when I showed him the flyer, he gave it a once-over, then proceeded to rip up the only copy I had on hand, and he gave me a death glare, the like of which I had never seen.
You don't get it. I already made plans, and I've sacrificed too much to not go back now. I'm storming that castle in a few days, with the Vigabane Legion. I'll show those cowardly tomcats that a Minotaur is a deadly foe to make.
He put his plate down and affixed his eyes on the group, as he had many times before. Ahani putting down her plate, and, like an automaton, began dictating everything Kind had to say.
It all truly began on that one day, when it all came together. My squireship, the Man Reaper's rampage, and that ambassadorial visit from the Rejalasad.
Hi, my name is Matthew Lewis, and I do the voice of Kycell Bakshi, along with all the additional voices in The Forgotten Minotaur King. I hope you enjoy the podcast and continue to listen into the future. If you want to support my content, please donate to my Patreon, Matthew Lewis Podcasts. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, Matthew Lewis Podcasts, all one word. Follow me on Twitter at Matthew Lewis P. Or leave a positive maximum star review on your podcast app of choice. If you found this podcast, I assume you're familiar enough with the genre to know how important reviews are to the survival of a channel. And I hope you recommend this to your friends. Or if you didn't like it, you could recommend it to your enemies, and I'll teach them a lesson. Keep it sleazy, folks, and thank you.